On the night of the Harvest Festival, a simple accident united two gazes that would never forget each other. Between storms, secrets, and choices that change destinies, they discovered that love is also made of sacrifices. A story of courage, reconciliation, and surrender. Prepare to feel every beat of this journey. Subscribe, like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. There are encounters that seem written by the wind. Hers was with a man who tried to hide his heart behind a wall of silence. The harvest night in Fisherman's Cove was always the brightest of the year. Colorful paper lanterns swayed on strings stretched over the central square, creating an artificial sky that rivaled the stars. Emily adjusted the light blue cotton dress she had sewn especially for the occasion and tried to ignore the discomfort she felt with the curious glances around her. The 3 years since she had returned from the capital had been difficult. Rebuilding her reputation and her sewing business in a city where everyone knew her story, or thought they knew, required a strength she didn't even know she possessed. Now, at 28, she finally felt part of that place again, even though glances still followed her with poorly disguised curiosity. The square was packed. Children ran among adults who chatted animatedly. The aroma of roasted corn and fresh fish mingled in the warm night air. Emily smiled when she saw Mrs. Catherine, the octogenarian who had always supported her, waving from her chair strategically positioned to observe the entire festivity. "You look beautiful, dear," the lady commented when Emily approached. "That dress is a masterpiece." "Thank you," Emily replied, smoothing the delicate fabric with her hands calloused from so much sewing. "I wanted something special for tonight." "And you succeeded. Look how everyone is admiring." Emily blushed, aware of the glances, but satisfied with her work. The dress was simple in silhouette, but the details, small, shiny beads hand-sewn, a perfect fit that flattered her delicate figure, revealed the talent that could have taken her far beyond that coastal town. "Go dance, dear," Mrs. Catherine encouraged. "Life is too short to just watch." With a smile, Emily headed to the center of the square, where couples were already spinning to the sound of guitars and accordions. That's when everything happened. A child ran by, chasing a balloon that had escaped. A couple too focused on dancing didn't see the child and swerved abruptly. The impact was inevitable. Emily felt herself pushed backward, stumbling over her own feet. She would have fallen if it hadn't been for the firm hands that caught her. However, the sudden movement was too much for the delicate fabric of her dress. The sound of the tear was muffled by the music, but to Emily it seemed deafening. She felt the cool night air touch her exposed skin and froze, mortified. That's when she felt something heavy and warm cover her shoulders, and a deep voice murmured close to her ear, "Use my jacket, I'm sorry about the dress." When she turned, she met the intense brown eyes of Henry Westbrook, the man who ran the town's only hotel, known for his almost obsessive precision and for keeping his distance from local events. Tall, with impeccable posture and features that seemed carved in stone, he had a presence that intimidated most residents. Emily knew him by sight, of course. In Fisherman's Cove, with its 3,000 inhabitants, it was impossible not to know everyone by name. But they had never exchanged more than polite greetings when she delivered clothing orders to the hotel. "Thank you," she said, wrapping herself in the jacket that smelled of cedar and sea. "But it wasn't your fault." "It was," he insisted, frowning as if analyzing a complex problem. "I should have anticipated the crowd, calculated my space better. Dance movement follows predictable patterns. I could have avoided it." Emily couldn't contain a smile at the seriousness with which he spoke about something so trivial. Around them, the music continued, guitars and accordions creating a melody that mixed with the distant sound of waves. "Do you always plan everything with such precision?" she asked, adjusting the jacket over her shoulders. Something in his features softened for an instant, a glimpse of vulnerability so brief that Emily almost thought she had imagined it. But soon he resumed the contained expression everyone knew. "Planning prevents disappointments," he replied simply, looking at the tear in the dress. "I can arrange another dress for you tomorrow as compensation." "You don't need to. I can fix it myself," she replied, surprisingly touched by the offer, even though it was too formal. "I'm a seamstress, remember?" "Of course," he nodded, seeming slightly disconcerted for having forgotten this detail. "Anyway, I'll compensate you somehow." Before Emily could protest, he made a slight bow and disappeared into the dancing crowd. She stood there, wrapped in a jacket that didn't belong to her, with the strange sensation that this brief encounter had been more significant than it should have been. "What was that?" asked Jennifer, her best friend since childhood, approaching with wide eyes. "Henry Westbrook talking to you and giving you his jacket?" "It was just an accident," Emily explained, pointing to the tear. "He felt responsible." "Responsible? He barely looks at people when he passes down the street. And now he's worried about your dress?" Jennifer shook her head, incredulous. "There's something more there." "Don't be ridiculous," Emily retorted, but couldn't help her eyes searching for Henry in the crowd. She didn't find him. The next morning, when the sun had barely risen, someone knocked on the door of the small wooden house where Emily lived alone since her grandmother's death. Upon opening, she found a basket with various quality fabrics she could never afford with her local seamstress budget. There were delicate silks, Egyptian cottons, French laces, a small treasure for someone of her craft. There was no note, but she knew exactly who the gift was from. The gesture surprised her not only for its generosity, but for the attention to detail. They weren't random fabrics, but carefully selected by someone who had noticed the type of material she used in her creations. That was just the beginning. In the following days, Henry began appearing at the market while she bought fruit, offering to carry her bags. One morning, she found him fixing the broken fence of her house, working with the same methodical precision he applied to hotel administration. "You didn't need to do this," she commented, offering him a glass of fresh water. "The fence could wait." "It was loose," he replied simply, as if that explained everything. "It could fall with the next strong wind." The following week, he was there when the roof began to leak during a heavy rain. He appeared at her door with tools and wood, without prior announcement, and spent hours fixing the broken tiles while the rain diminished. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked one afternoon, when he appeared offering a ride to the neighboring town, where she needed to buy special threads for an important order. "It's the least I can do for the dress," he replied automatically, as if he had rehearsed the answer. "A dress that I sewed myself and already fixed," she observed, crossing her arms. "This has nothing to do with the dress, does it?" He looked away, suddenly interested in the movement of waves on the nearby beach. The sunlight reflected on the water, creating thousands of bright points, like the festival lanterns. "Maybe I just want to help." "You're not known for being so present in other people's lives." Henry stiffened, and Emily realized she had touched on some sensitive point. "People talk about me," he stated, not as a question. "It's a small town. Everyone talks about everyone." "And what do they say?" he asked, finally looking her in the eyes. There was something almost vulnerable in that look, as if the answer really mattered. Emily hesitated. The truth was that Henry Westbrook was an enigma for most residents. He had returned 5 years ago after his father's death to take over the family hotel. Since then, he remained distant, efficient in his business, but rarely participating in community life. Some called him arrogant, others antisocial. Few had interacted enough with him to form a more grounded opinion. "They say you're reserved, meticulous, that you like to keep your distance." "And do you believe all that?" "I'm more interested in finding out for myself," she replied, feeling a courage she didn't know she possessed. "Are you going to give me that ride or not?" It was during that trip that Emily began to glimpse the man behind the reputation. Henry drove in silence, but it was a comfortable silence. The road serpentined between green hills, the sea always visible to the right, an immense blue carpet that stretched to the horizon. When he finally spoke, he told about how he inherited the hotel from his father, a rigid man who never expressed approval, no matter how much his son tried. He spoke of the constant pressure to keep the town's only hotel running with perfection, as if any failure could confirm his father's negative expectations, even years after his death. "That's why the perfectionism," Emily concluded, observing how his hands gripped the steering wheel firmly, as if afraid of losing control. "It's simpler to keep everything in order. Predictable," he admitted. People are complicated." "Not all of them," she smiled, and for a moment felt she had crossed an invisible barrier. The conversation flowed more easily after that. Henry revealed that he had studied administration in the capital, that he liked chess and history books, that he woke up every day at 5 in the morning to swim in the sea before the city awakened. Emily told about her passion for sewing, inherited from her grandmother, about how she dreamed of creating clothes that told stories, about the nights she stayed awake until late drawing models by candlelight. The sky darkened when they returned, large black clouds announcing the storm everyone feared at that time of year. The rain began as a whisper and quickly transformed into a deluge, reducing visibility to almost nothing. When they finally reached Fisherman's Cove, they found chaos. The main road blocked by a landslide, houses with water up to their knees, people carrying belongings to higher areas. "My house is in the lower part," Emily murmured, feeling panic grow. The small wooden construction, her grandmother's inheritance, was directly in the path of waters descending from the hills. Without hesitation, Henry drove the car to the hotel, located at the highest point of the city. The stone construction, erected by his grandfather almost 70 years ago, was one of the few truly safe structures in the region. "You can stay here until the situation normalizes," he offered, with a formality that contrasted with the urgency of the moment. Emily wanted to refuse, maintain her independence, but common sense prevailed. "Thank you," she accepted, looking worriedly through the window, where the rain continued, merciless. The hotel was almost empty. Few tourists visited the city at that time of year. Henry led her to a room on the second floor with a view of the rough sea. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, still formal. "I'll check if anyone else needs help." Before she could respond, he had already left, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the storm outside. In the following weeks, while the city struggled to recover, Emily discovered a new Henry. She saw him coordinate rescue teams, distribute food, give hotel rooms to homeless families. The reserved and distant man transformed into a capable leader, organizing recovery efforts with the same efficiency he applied to his hotel, but now with a greater purpose. They worked side by side, passing sandbags, cleaning debris, comforting frightened children. Emily used her talents to mend damaged clothes, transform sheets into improvised garments, create small dolls from scraps for traumatized children. On a particularly exhausting night, while they lit candles in Mrs. Catherine's house, the oldest lady in town, it happened. Their hands touched when reaching for the same box of matches, and neither pulled back. For a second, maybe two, they stayed like that, connected by this simple contact. The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Emily could hear his breathing, slightly accelerated, or maybe it was her own. "You're different from what I imagined," Emily confessed, her voice almost a whisper in the house's penumbra. "How did you imagine me?" he asked, still without moving his hand away. Cold, distant, incapable of caring. Henry smiled, a rare smile that completely transformed his face, softening the tension lines, illuminating the always serious eyes. "Maybe I just needed a good reason to get closer." It was Mrs. Catherine who interrupted the moment, entering the room with dragging steps, supported by her dark wooden cane. "You two make a beautiful couple," she commented with the frankness of the very old. "You remind me of me and my James, God rest his soul." Emily blushed furiously while Henry became visibly uncomfortable. But something had changed. The seed was planted. In the following weeks, while the city gradually returned to normalcy, that moment seemed to vibrate between them. Unmentioned, but always present in furtive glances, contained smiles, approaches that seemed calculated to appear accidental. Henry continued appearing in Emily's life, no longer with excuses related to the dress, but with small gestures that spoke louder than words. One morning, she found a rare book about sewing techniques on the porch. On another occasion, it was a set of special needles imported from the capital. And there were the flowers, simple field daisies that appeared at her door every Monday without card or explanation. "He's courting you old-fashioned style," Jennifer commented, with a mix of envy and admiration. "Who would have thought Mr. Formality had this romantic side?" "It's not exactly courting," Emily protested, though her heart raced thinking about the possibilities. "Just kindnesses." "Kindnesses?" Jennifer laughed. "Emily, the man literally rebuilt half your house after the storm. That goes far beyond kindnesses." With spring's arrival, the city began preparing for the traditional festival. At the community council meeting, when pairs were drawn for square decoration, no one seemed surprised when Emily and Henry were chosen to work together. They say couples who decorate the square at the spring festival are destined to grow closer, commented Mr. Anthony, the town's oldest fisherman, with a mischievous smile. It's tradition. Superstitions, Henry murmured. But Emily noticed he didn't protest against the partnership. In the following nights, they worked under the starry sky, hanging lanterns similar to those from the Harvest Festival, choosing flowers, intertwining colorful ribbons on the posts. They talked about everything and nothing, old dreams, fears, small everyday joys. On one of those nights, sitting on a bench after hours of work, Henry surprised her with a question. "Why did you never leave here?" he asked, while they adjusted a flower garland at the square's entrance. "Someone with your talent could have a much bigger career in a large city." Emily hesitated. Few people knew her complete story, and it wasn't something she liked to share. But with Henry, she felt a strange security. "I tried once," she admitted, focusing on the flowers to avoid looking at him. "I went to the capital, had a promised job at a famous atelier. And what happened?" "Life happened," she shrugged, trying to seem casual, though the memory still hurt. "The job never materialized. The man who made me the promise, well, let's say his intentions were different." Henry stopped what he was doing, his face hardening. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically," she hurried to say, touched by the evident concern in his voice. "But I learned to distrust promises that are too beautiful. Grand gestures. Real life is made of small truths, not grand declarations." He nodded, understanding more than she imagined. "I also have my scars," he confessed, surprising her with the unusual openness. "There was someone in Boston before I came back to take over the hotel." "What happened?" "She left. Without explanations, without goodbyes. One day she was there. The next there was only a note saying she couldn't continue." He adjusted a flower that insisted on falling from the garland, with the precision that characterized him. "That's when I realized that giving myself completely to someone is a risk not worth taking." "And that's why you keep everyone at a distance? For fear of getting hurt again?" Henry didn't answer immediately. The silence between them was charged with possibilities, with unspoken things, with wounds not completely healed. When he finally spoke, his voice was loaded with contained emotion, as if each word was carefully selected. "Until now, it seemed the safest choice." "Until now?" Emily repeated, her heart racing. But the moment was interrupted by Aunt Augusta, Henry's father's older sister, who approached with determined steps. Tall and thin, with gray hair impeccably styled and always elegant clothes, she was the personification of what remained of the local old aristocracy. "Henry, I need to speak with you," she said, casting a critical look at Emily. "In private." Emily moved away, pretending to adjust other decorations, but could still hear fragments of the conversation. "Not appropriate. Your position in town. Fisherman's daughter. What your father would say." The words, though incomplete, were like small daggers. Emily had grown up hearing similar comments, subtle or explicit reminders that, despite her talent, she was still just a fisherman's granddaughter and a domestic worker's daughter. Her mother had left when she was only 5, leaving her in her grandmother's care, who did her best to give her a good education but never managed to completely erase the stigma. When Henry returned, his face had resumed the mask of formality. "Sorry about that," he said, tense. "Your aunt doesn't approve of me," Emily stated, feeling a pang of pain. "Aunt Augusta has antiquated ideas about social position. She doesn't understand." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Doesn't understand what?" "That some things are more important than appearances or status." The spring festival was a success. The square had never been so beautiful, everyone commented. The carefully arranged flowers, strategically positioned lanterns, colorful ribbons dancing with the breeze. Everything created a magical, almost dreamlike atmosphere. And although Emily and Henry had barely talked during the event, the glances they exchanged spoke for themselves. There was a tension between them, a mutual awareness that seemed to electrify the air. The next day, Emily received a letter that changed everything. The Capital Atelier, now under new management, offered her the position that had been promised years before. A job that meant realizing the dream she had abandoned, but that also meant leaving Fisherman's Cove and Henry behind. The letter trembled in her hands as she reread the words, trying to process what this meant. It was everything she had always wanted, the opportunity she had cried for so many nights. But now, for the first time, she felt divided. Meanwhile, Christina, the daughter of the market owner who had always shown interest in Henry, began spreading a distorted version of the dress incident. In her narrative, it would have been Emily who intentionally provoked the tear to get Henry's attention, knowing his position in town. "It's ridiculous," Emily protested when Jennifer, her best friend, told her about the rumors. "It was an accident, everyone saw." "The problem isn't whether they believe it or not," Jennifer explained gently. "The problem is that you and he have become the town's main topic, and you know how people here like to talk." The situation worsened during Fisherman's Day, an annual celebration where everyone gathered on the beach to see decorated boats and share stories at sunset. Emily was chatting animatedly with Peter, a childhood friend who had returned to town after years away, when she noticed Henry watching her from afar. The expression on his face, a mixture of jealousy and resignation, made her heart tighten. Peter, oblivious to the tension, continued telling about his adventures in the capital, his arm casually resting on her shoulders, a familiar gesture of longtime friends. Later, when she tried to approach Henry, he was distant, almost cold. "It seems you and Peter have a lot to talk about," he commented, with a formality he hadn't used with her for weeks. "Peter is just a childhood friend," she explained, frustrated with the unjustified jealousy. "It doesn't mean anything." "You don't need to give me explanations," he replied, moving away. "You're free to choose your company." Emily wanted to scream with frustration. How could they advance so much in their connection and at the same time remain trapped in insecurities and misunderstandings? Summer brought with it a wave of tourists, filling Henry's hotel and keeping Emily busy with orders for light clothes for visitors. They saw each other less, and when they met, there was a tension that hadn't existed before. It was during this time that Emily's past finally came to light. During a beach party, Marcus, Mrs. Catherine's nephew, arrived for a visit. Tall, charming, and with a smile that enchanted at first sight, he was exactly as Emily remembered, dangerously attractive and completely unworthy of trust. Emily paled upon seeing him. He was the same man who had promised her a job in the capital years before, only to try to seduce her when she arrived there, vulnerable and alone. When she refused his advances, he made her life impossible, spreading rumors that tarnished her professional reputation before she could even begin. Henry, who had begun to approach her again in recent weeks, noticed her reaction and approached. "Are you okay?" he asked, genuinely concerned. "That man," she indicated with a discreet gesture. "It's Marcus. The man you mentioned, from the capital?" Emily nodded, feeling her stomach churn. "I never imagined he was Mrs. Catherine's nephew, that he could appear here. Do you want me to take you home?" Henry offered, positioning himself protectively beside her. Before she could respond, Marcus spotted them and approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Emily, what a surprise to find you here. You disappeared from the capital so suddenly." "I didn't disappear," she replied, finding courage in Henry's presence. "I came home after I realized your true intentions." Marcus laughed, too relaxed. "You got it all wrong, dear. I really was going to help you with the job, but you didn't give me a chance to explain. I think the lady has made it clear she's not interested in your explanations," Henry intervened, his voice calm but firm. "And who are you?" Marcus asked, looking him up and down. "Someone who cares about her well-being," Henry replied simply. Marcus looked from one to the other and smiled, understanding the situation. "I see. Well, Emily, I just wanted to say that the atelier is now mine. I was the one who sent the letter with the job offer." Emily felt the ground disappear under her feet. The letter, the opportunity that seemed so perfect. Was it all part of some game of his? "You didn't say anything about a letter or job," Henry spoke slowly, looking at her with an expression difficult to decipher. "I was going to tell you," she explained hurriedly. "I was just thinking about it first. Thinking about leaving," he concluded, his voice losing emotion. "Without telling me anything." "It's not like that, It seems you have a lot to talk about," Marcus interrupted, clearly satisfied with the discord he had caused. I'll leave you alone." When he moved away, the silence between Emily and Henry was heavy as lead. "Why didn't you tell me about the job offer?" he finally asked. "Because I didn't know what to do," she admitted, feeling tears threaten to fall. "It's the job I've always dreamed of, but it would mean leaving all this behind." "All this or someone specific?" he pressed, his eyes seeking a confirmation she hesitated to give. "Both," Emily finally confessed. "But now it doesn't matter anymore. I won't accept anything that comes from Marcus." "The problem isn't the job itself," Henry said, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "It's the fact that you were considering leaving without even telling me." "How could I tell you?" she retorted, feeling tears in her eyes. "I don't even know what we are to each other, Henry. You get close and then pull away. You get jealous but don't say why. What do you expect from me?" He remained silent for a long moment, his face a mask of internal conflict. "I don't know," he finally replied. "And that's exactly the problem." He turned and walked toward the hotel, leaving Emily alone on the beach, with the sound of waves muffling the sob that escaped her throat. The days that followed were gray, despite the summer sun. Emily felt hollow, as if an essential part of herself had been torn away. She plunged into work, accepting more orders than she could handle, sewing until late at night, letting the repetitive movement of the needle numb her thoughts. In the following weeks, they barely spoke. Emily formally refused the job offer, writing a detailed letter where she exposed Marcus's true actions years before. She sent copies to the atelier and to the seamstresses' union, determined to prevent other women from going through the same. It was a small victory, but it didn't alleviate the pain of Henry's distancing. He, in turn, received a proposal to expand the hotel, a project that would require frequent trips to the capital and into which he plunged completely. Residents saw him entering and leaving City Hall with architectural plans under his arm, talking to contractors, examining land adjacent to the hotel. It was as if all the progress he had made in opening up to the community had been reversed. He had returned to being the distant man focused only on his work. The tension between them was so palpable that even the most distracted residents noticed. The city, which before commented on their approach with approval, now speculated about the breakup with the same voracity. "You two are too stubborn," Mrs. Catherine declared when Emily went to deliver a mended dress. The elderly woman, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, observed Emily with eyes that, though clouded by age, still saw far beyond the apparent. "I don't know what you're talking about." Emily tried to change the subject, adjusting the dress's seam. "Yes, you do," the elderly woman insisted. "I'm talking about you and Henry. This cat and mouse game you're playing while life passes by. There's no game, we just drifted apart. Pride is a slow poison, you know," Mrs. Catherine continued, ignoring the denial. "It corrodes everything inside until nothing remains." "It's not pride," Emily protested weakly. "It's just that some obstacles are too difficult to overcome." "Nonsense," the lady replied, adjusting her thick glasses. "The only real obstacle between you is fear. Fear of getting hurt again, fear of trusting, fear of discovering that maybe it's worth risking everything for someone." Emily didn't respond. What could she say when Mrs. Catherine had put into words exactly what she felt? "You know," the elderly woman continued, her gaze losing itself in the waves breaking on the nearby beach, "my James and I also had our obstacles. My family didn't approve of him. They thought a simple fisherman wasn't enough for me, coming from a family of merchants. And for a while, I let those voices keep me away from him." "And what happened?" Emily asked, genuinely interested. "Life happened. There was a terrible storm, much worse than the recent one. James went out with other fishermen to rescue a drifting boat. He almost died." Mrs. Catherine breathed deeply, the memory still vivid after so many decades. "That's when I realized that all pride, all others' expectations, meant nothing compared to what I would feel if I lost him." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. The idea of losing Henry, even now that they were apart, was unbearable. "I'm not saying it's easy," Mrs. Catherine concluded. "Just that in the end, we rarely regret the love we give. We regret the love that, out of fear, we keep to ourselves." Mrs. Catherine's words kept hammering in Emily's head for days. Meanwhile, the city prepared for the traditional Night of Lanterns, when everyone wrote wishes on small papers, placed them inside floating lanterns, and launched them to the sea. It was an ancient celebration that mixed elements from different cultures brought by immigrants who helped form Fisherman's Cove. In the days leading up to the event, Emily worked on her own lantern, creating a more elaborate design than usual. It was her way of channeling anxiety and sadness. Her hands always knew how to express what her heart felt, whether through stitching or paper folding. On the night of the event, Emily went to the beach alone, carrying her still unlit lantern. The sand was full of people. The starry sky served as a ceiling for that celebration of hope. Children ran excitedly, couples walked hand in hand, elderly people watched with eyes moist with nostalgia. In the distance, she saw Henry. He also saw her, but both remained where they were, separated by a crowd and still open wounds. Even at a distance, she could notice how tired he looked, thinner, with dark circles that weren't there before. When it was time, everyone lit their lanterns simultaneously. The spectacle was breathtaking, hundreds of points of light slowly rising to the sky, carrying the deepest wishes of that community. There was something magical in that collective moment, as if the entire city breathed in unison, united by hope for better days. Emily watched her lantern drift away, carrying with it a simple wish: courage. Not the heroic courage of stories, but the everyday courage to allow herself to be vulnerable again. To believe that, even with scars, her heart still knew how to love. That's when she noticed something different. One of the lanterns hadn't risen with the others. It was on the sand near the water, as if it had been left there purposely. Curious, she approached. The lantern had something written on the outside, in handwriting she immediately recognized. For Emily. With trembling fingers, she opened the lantern and found not a simple wish, but a letter. In the flickering candlelight, she read the words that changed everything. Emily, I spent my whole life protecting myself. I built walls so high I forgot what it feels like to feel the sun on my face. Then you appeared, with a torn dress and a strength I never found in anyone else. I'm afraid. Afraid of not being enough, afraid you'll leave. Afraid of discovering I don't know how to love properly. But I realized I'm even more afraid of a life where I didn't try. My wish tonight isn't for the stars, it's for you. Forgive my cowardice, my silence, my inability to say what really matters. If you're still willing to try, I'll be waiting at the end of the beach, where the path leads to the lighthouse. I'm not good with words or gestures, but I'm learning. For you, I want to learn. Henry. Emily felt tears flow freely down her face. Around her, people continued watching the lanterns that were now just distant points in the dark sky. She looked toward the end of the beach, and even in the penumbra, could distinguish his silhouette, waiting patiently where he had promised. Without hesitation, she walked toward him, leaving behind the lantern and everything that tied her to the past. The cold sand caressed her bare feet. The sound of waves seemed synchronized with the accelerated beats of her heart. With each step, she felt lighter, as if she were leaving behind not just physical distance, but all the fears and insecurities that prevented her from giving herself completely. When they finally stood face to face, there was no need for words. The embrace they shared said everything that needed to be said. Emily felt his arms envelop her with strength, as if he feared she might disappear. She felt the warmth of his body, the familiar scent of cedar and sea, the accelerated breathing that revealed his nervousness. I missed you, he murmured against her hair. Me too, she replied, allowing herself to sink into that embrace, feeling, for the first time in weeks, truly at home. When they finally pulled apart enough to look into each other's eyes, Emily saw something she had never seen before. Henry was crying. It wasn't convulsive crying, just silent tears descending down his usually controlled face. I never cried in front of anyone, he confessed, almost in a whisper. Not even when my father died. Emily touched his face gently, drying a tear with her thumb. Thank you for trusting me enough to show this part of yourself. You make me want to be more than I've always been, he replied, holding her hand against his face. Less controlled, more alive. And you make me feel safe enough to believe again, she smiled through her own tears. To trust that not all beautiful gestures hide bad intentions. In the following weeks, the city witnessed, first with surprise and then with approval, the unfolding of that romance. They saw Henry give up the hotel expansion project, choosing to remain in the city to be with Emily. They saw Emily open her own small atelier, transforming the dream she had in the capital into something more personal and authentic. The space, small but welcoming, quickly became a meeting point for local women who wanted to learn to sew. Emily discovered that teaching was as gratifying as creating, seeing the sparkle in a student's eyes when she finally mastered a difficult stitch, a young mother's satisfaction when sewing her daughter's first dress, the self-confidence that grew along with manual skills. The sacrifices they made for each other didn't go unnoticed. Aunt Augusta, initially opposed to the relationship, softened when she saw the positive transformation in her nephew, as if he had finally found peace. "I've never seen him smile so much," she admitted to Emily on a tea afternoon, an invitation that surprised everyone. "My brother raised him to be strong, not to be happy. Maybe you're teaching him something none of us knew how." Even Christina, after weeks of resentful looks, eventually accepted reality. The community, which liked to talk so much, now had other stories to tell. How the severe hotel owner had transformed, how the talented seamstress had finally found her place, how sometimes love happens in the most unlikely places. Their romance was built in small moments, the coffee he prepared on winter mornings, taking it to her house before the sun rose, the shirts she sewed for him, with attention to every detail, the silent walks on the beach, where only the sound of waves served as soundtrack for a conversation that didn't need words. One morning, Emily woke to the sound of hammering. Going out to check, she found Henry building a porch in front of her house. "What are you doing?" she asked, still sleepy. "I thought it would be nice to have a place to watch the sunset," he replied, not stopping his work. "This side of the house has the best view." "It's a beautiful gesture, but you didn't need to do this alone. You could have hired someone." Henry stopped, looking at her seriously. "I wanted to do it with my own hands, for you." That's when Emily understood. For a man like him, accustomed to delegating, to supervising, to maintaining distance, the physical act of building something was a form of love as eloquent as any word. On summer nights, they sat on that porch, watching the stars, planning a future that, for the first time, didn't seem frightening. They talked about expanding the atelier, about attracting more tourists to the hotel, about how they could contribute to the city's growth without losing its essence. "Have you ever thought about teaching at a formal school?" Henry asked one night, while they watched the moon reflected in the sea. "Your knowledge could benefit many more people." "Sometimes I think about it," she admitted. "But I like the atelier's intimacy, knowing each student by name, adapting teaching to each one's needs." "We could build a craft school," he suggested, his strategic brain already visualizing possibilities. Not just sewing, but all the region's traditional arts, pottery, weaving, basket making. Emily smiled, enchanted with the idea. It would be a way to preserve knowledge that's being lost. And to create jobs, attract tourists interested in culture, revitalize ancient techniques. That's how they worked together. She brought the heart, he the structure. She dreamed, he planned. They complemented each other in a way neither had experienced before. Autumn arrived, bringing stronger winds and rough seas. One night, during a particularly violent storm, Emily woke startled by urgent knocking on her door. It was Jennifer, soaked and breathless. "It's Mr. Anthony," she explained between heavy breaths. "He went out to check the lobster traps before the storm got worse. The boat capsized near the rocks. They're organizing a rescue." Without thinking twice, Emily dressed quickly. When she reached the beach, she found a group of men preparing a rescue boat, Henry among them. "What are you doing?" she asked, alarmed. "Helping," he replied simply. "I know these waters as well as any fisherman." "It's too dangerous," she protested, fear gripping her chest like a vice. "Let the more experienced fishermen—" "Every minute counts," he interrupted gently. "And we are few. I'll be fine, I promise." Before she could argue more, he gave her a quick kiss and boarded with the other men. Emily stayed on the beach, along with other women and elderly people, watching the boat fight against the giant waves until it disappeared into the darkness. They were the longest 2 hours of her life. The rain fell mercilessly, the wind howled, and the sea seemed determined to swallow anything that dared challenge it. Emily prayed like she had never prayed before, asking for protection not only for Henry, but for all the brave men who risked their lives to save one of their own. When they finally spotted the boat returning, a collective sigh of relief swept the beach. One by one, the men disembarked, soaked and exhausted, but alive. Mr. Anthony, the last to descend, was pale and trembling violently, but smiled in gratitude. Henry was second to last to exit, helping to carry equipment. When he finally stepped on the sand, Emily ran to him, hugging him with all her strength, not caring about the water that soaked her clothes. "Never do this to me again," she murmured against his chest. "Never again." "I had to help," he explained, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "I couldn't just stand watching." "I know," she replied, finally understanding that part of what she loved about him was exactly this willingness to act, to do what needed to be done, without hesitation. "I just don't know if my heart can handle so much fear." "Then I'll have to make sure I always come back to you," he promised, hugging her tightly. That night, after Henry finally slept, exhausted from the rescue mission, Emily stayed awake, watching him. She realized that love wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it. That loving someone meant accepting the possibility of loss, but choosing to move forward anyway. When the Harvest Festival returned, exactly 1 year after the dress incident, the entire city seemed to hold its breath. Colorful lanterns swayed again over the square, music filled the air with joyful melodies, and the smell of homemade food spread to every corner. Emily wore a new dress, made with one of the fabrics Henry had given her that first morning. The deep blue enhanced her eyes, and the cut, though simple, flattered every curve of her body. She had worked on it for weeks, sewing small silver beads that shone like stars with every movement. Henry wore an impeccable shirt, but his posture was no longer rigid as before. There was a softness in his gestures, a relaxation that only comes when one finally allows oneself to be who they really are. In the center of the square, where it all began, he extended his hand to her, an invitation to dance that meant much more than just that. It was a public gesture, a silent declaration to the entire city. Emily accepted his hand, and together they danced under the same lights that witnessed their first encounter. They were no longer strangers who bumped into each other by accident, but two people who, despite all barriers, fears, and uncertainties, chose to build something together. "Do you still plan everything with such precision?" she whispered in his ear while they danced. He smiled, that rare smile that now appeared more frequently. "Some things are better when unpredictable," he replied, pulling her closer. "Like finding you that night, exactly 1 year ago." "Who would have thought a torn dress could change so much?" she commented, remembering how it all began. "It wasn't the dress," he corrected gently. "It was you. Your strength, your authenticity, your heart that, despite all disappointments, still knew how to trust." The music changed to a slower melody, and they continued dancing, lost in their own world. While around them, the city celebrated another year of abundant harvest. "Did you know they say couples who dance together at the Harvest Festival stay together forever?" she commented, resting her head on his shoulder. "I thought you didn't believe in superstitions," he teased gently. "I didn't," she admitted, "but I'm learning to believe in some things again." And while the lanterns swayed above them, spreading dancing shadows across the cobblestone floor, Emily understood that the true miracle wasn't in grand gestures or grandiose declarations, but in the everyday courage to choose to love, even when it means becoming vulnerable. Under the starry sky, cradled by music and protected by the lantern's glow, they continued dancing, not as two separate people, but as two hearts that finally found their common rhythm. A rhythm that, like the sea that embraced their city, might know storms and calms but would remain constant, uninterrupted, eternal. That night, when they returned home, her house, which gradually became theirs, Henry held Emily's hands between his and spoke with a voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for teaching me that the walls we build to protect ourselves are the same ones that prevent us from living fully. For showing me there's strength in vulnerability, there's beauty in imperfections, there's freedom in simply allowing oneself to feel." Emily, with tears in her eyes, replied with the simplicity that always characterized their relationship. And thank you for showing me that not all promises are empty, that not all gestures hide second intentions, that it's possible to rebuild trust, one small moment at a time. On the porch he had built with his own hands, under the starry sky that witnessed their entire journey, they sealed with a kiss the silent promise to continue choosing each other, day after day, regardless of the storms that might still come. And so, in the small coastal town of Fisherman's Cove, where the sound of waves lulled residents' dreams and lanterns illuminated paths on festival nights, Emily and Henry discovered that true love isn't the absence of obstacles, but the courage to face them side by side. That it's not perfection, but acceptance of imperfections. That it's not a final destination, but a continuous journey of discoveries, new beginnings, and small everyday joys that, together, form an extraordinary life. If this story touched your heart, share it, because love, even with all its imperfections and obstacles, always deserves to be told.